Okay, hi everyone. So, as George said, I'm going to go quite rapidly through a story of EMG, an NGO, and Goedverwacht, which is a community close to Piketberg, about 2 hours north of Cape Town. So I'll describe the relationship to date, and then Ian's going to reflect on how the process aims to look at the usefulness of localizing climate models to support community-based adaptation plans. The project has had a very open question about whether taking quite specific climate information into kind of community building processes is useful or not, and we're open to the possibility that it's not. The team is 2 NGOs, Umpilo Wamanzi and Environmental Monitoring Group, 4 community groups. In the Western Cape, it's Goedverwacht and Herbertsdale, and in KwaZulu-Natal, Mzimyati, which is a kind of peri-urban area on the outskirts of Durban, and another which has not yet been decided. This is all very much in process. 2 hydrologists from UKZN, Michelle Warburton and Sabina Hill-Smith, and a climate scientist. So Peter Johnston is kind of an advisor on the project. This is just to say that this is a very ongoing project, and I'm not going to talk about that project, but just to say that there have been very interesting discussions in that team about lots of the things that were mentioned yesterday: interdisciplinarity, the science-society interface, definitions versus experiences of vulnerability, the roles of NGOs, and best practice in communicating climate science. So this is ongoing, and watch the space, and hopefully if there's a colloquium next year, we can talk more about what's coming out of that project. So in a way so you know, we're an NGO, we get funding to work with communities, and the first thing we do is chat amongst our colleagues about where should we take this project. And a very important criteria for us in selecting where we were going to do this, because there was such a short cycle and money for 3 workshops, and then you kind of move on to the next pilot, was to say, let's go somewhere where there is real potential for an ongoing relationship, and also where people are already calling for some kind of intervention. You don't have time in 3 workshops to build relationships and figure out whether it really works to work together and all those kinds of things. So some people from Goedverwacht had actually attended some climate change workshops with Project 90 by 2030, which Brenda spoke about earlier, and had a little taste of some climate change information, and were connected to an EMG colleague in the Northern Cape, to Noel and Bettina. And so we kind of knew a little bit about Goedverwacht, and we knew that they had some awareness of climate change and were hungry for more information. So we had an introductory meeting that was very open to say, this is what we can offer, and are you guys interested? And there was quite a resounding yes, we are very interested. So just basically, you know, from that first meeting, people raised concerns and things that they imagined EMG could somehow support with. There's a river running through the valley that Goedverwacht is situated in, and people are very worried about water. They've got fire in late summer that threatens their agriculture and their houses. A huge problem with Port Jackson, alien trees sucking all the water out of the river. They're worried about over-irrigation by neighbors, accessing markets, and quite underpinning all of these worries is that in Goedverwacht people are constrained by their status as tenants. Goedverwacht is a Moravian mission town, and the church still owns all of the land, and so in effect people who have generations have lived on this land as tenants. And actually there's a very strong call for allies in addressing this and looking at possibilities for land reform, and so really a strong and innovative group and groups in community doing innovative projects, but at every turn they are blocked by the fact that there's this insecurity of the fact that they are actually tenants on the land. So briefly, what did we do throughout the process, the workshops that happened? We spent a lot of time carefully at the beginning talking about our expectations, the participants' expectations, and the scope for the project. So very clearly, this is, we've got 3 workshops that we can do over the course of 6 months. But we're it's very important to us that there is space for a longer-term relationship, but that is very clearly understood. So the longer-term relationship at this stage exists in the form of, as a small NGO, a lot of the work we do is through networks, through the Western Cape Water Caucus, which is community groupings addressing water injustice where they live, or through the Million Climate Jobs campaign, or the Adaptation network. And what we can offer is just, including people and bringing them into those spaces of sharing and solidarity and other opportunities that may come up. So the relationship at this stage is quite open. It's to say we are partners at the moment without a specific project in mind, but when opportunities arise to work together, we will continue to do so. And we spoke a lot about that and what that really means. We then spent quite a bit of time just connecting to nature's cycles before talking about climate change. And this was quite, I think this was a way of thinking that people weren't used to. We opened with a prayer, and then my colleague who does a lot of meditation kind of took people through a gentle meditation on the connection of the soil, the sun, and water to everything that we consume as people, and the connection that we have with all of those things. And people really, really loved that. And we then did that in each workshop. Some kind of close your eyes, listen to where you are, connect to your environment. And we then did a few exercises to talk about the resources and the assets of Grootverwag. What does Grootverwag have? People drew maps. We made a timeline and spoke about the water, the land, the institutions, all those kind of standard participatory processes. But there was a strong emphasis on let's start by looking at what we have, the assets, an asset-based approach. We then looked at a history of extreme weather and other shocks in Grootverwag. We made a big timeline, and we went from 1950 to the present, and what has happened here over time, and how did people respond, and who worked together, and if people didn't respond, what could they have done better, and what did they need in order to respond better. And then because there was a very particular, specific ask for more climate change information, we did sessions in each workshop on kind of climate change 101. What causes climate change? What are some of the impacts of climate change? Even a bit about the global politics. And we felt our way through this and kind of said, these are all the things we can talk about, and you let us know what you'd like to know more about. And I think that we were very clear that we weren't going in with a strong climate change agenda, because we've all spoken about the kind of, we don't want to ram this information down people's throats if they don't want to hear it. But I think that if we err too far on that impulse to not like force climate change information onto people, we lose an opportunity which is sometimes there, which is that in some cases it's incredibly interesting and useful and positive for people to hear this. People are hearing about climate change on the news, on the radio, they're observing it, and so in this case, I think it was really a positive experience to actually talk about a little bit about the facts of climate change. And then we actually, after 2 workshops of looking at, getting to know Grootverwag, what are people worried about, what do people have, we sat with the hydrologist from UKZN to develop some climate models, which we then, it was really, really difficult to get climate models, to get anything meaningful for one small valley in the Swartland. It's close to the mountains, which brings in a whole lot of kind of complications for the hydrology models. There was no weather station within the 100-kilometer radius. So I think that the scientists we were working with came up against a whole lot of challenges that maybe they anticipated, but some that they didn't expect, in how difficult it is to actually talk about localizing a climate change model for one small village. So we did a lot of work on what should we share from these climate models and what's useful and what isn't. And in the end, all we really spoke about was the projections for how many more hot days there will be relative to the past, how many more cold days there will be relative to the past. The rainfall data was extremely difficult. It looked like there would be no real change, but there could be. So we just spoke about unpredictability and uncertainty. And quite importantly was that when the hydrologists looked at the area and looked at land use change and the river, the two things that people in Grootverwacht were most concerned about were the alien trees and the neighboring farmers who are building dams and over-irrigating without consulting this community. And what the hydrologist said was absolutely that those are the things to worry about right now, more than climate change. Climate change will obviously exacerbate those, but we were able to come back and say, look, the best water minds in the country are saying that you guys are absolutely right in what you're concerned about, and those are the things to tackle and to figure out how to address. And that climate change is even more of an imperative to address those worrying things. And then we did some kind of visualizations. We did exercises of closing our eyes and thinking about next year and next decade and the next 100 years, and we took our minds all the way to a future that we can't even imagine, where the world ceases to exist. And we were quite nervous about doing that. It's quite a scary place to go to, but it really was about freeing our minds and also freeing ourselves to think beyond what we're concerned about right now, and just, yeah, kind of the smallness of who we are in this bigger picture, which helped us to then talk about climate change and thinking about 100 years from now and 200 years from now. But then we actually got quite specific, and we did an exercise called backcasting, which is where we spoke about, imagine a vision for Grootverwacht in 2050. And that vision was quite unconstrained. It was like, imagine the best world that you want your grandchildren to live in, within the realities of acknowledging that climate change and the economy are all very unpredictable factors. So we spoke about this kind of ideal but realistic world in 2050, and then we brought it back to 2020, what would need to be in place in 2020, and then we brought it to our next steps in order to get to, so we kind of did a leapfrogging of what we need to do right now to get to a bigger vision. This is just to show what we spoke about. So based on what we got from the hydrologist and the modelers, what does Grootverwacht, this one small town, need to respond to in terms of climate change? What can we kind of say for sure? More hot days, fewer cold days, possibly more droughts and floods in the region, land use changes, so that's the irrigated agriculture and alien vegetation, and what that is doing to the river. Changes in the agricultural economy and the larger economy, neighboring farmers and how they will respond to climate change. So the implications for jobs, water, food, in the fact that the region will be responding to climate change. It's not a little pocket acting on its own. And then we spoke about the low carbon economy. We spoke about what to do if fossil fuels become very expensive or even unavailable. We spoke about electricity and alternative energy. So we really spoke about the whole picture of climate change. And so what worked? Our reflections, so we had reflections at the end of each workshop, and then we've reflected as a team. And this is also based on longer-term work that EMG and all of our colleagues have been doing in community-led and community-based adaptation. It really worked to build on what was already there. The institutions, the initiatives, and the impulses that were already living in Grootverwacht. And then as facilitators, it helped us to understand our role being to reflect back to participants what they already have and know, to see it in a new light. So by coming in and just providing a space to talk about concerns, worries, visions, hopes. It was helping people to understand their situation, but it was things that they already knew, just kind of reflected back in a helpful way. So there's that, but there's also the important role of bringing new information and new ways of seeing, like the climate change information, like ideas about meditating and closing your eyes and listening to where you are. Those things are things that people really valued and that we were able to bring as outsiders. It worked to not be too attached to the climate models. So, you know, part of the project was really this testing of the models, but we had to be open to, we're not going to go and present 100 maps of, you know, potential changes. And luckily the team we're working with were very open to that. We did that in quite a responsive way. It worked to kind of build these visions for the future, but then to have very practical next steps. So I think Ian will talk a little bit about what are the practical next steps that we've chatted about. And then it works to have a very clear understanding of the limitations of the relationship. So complete transparency about money and time and what we really are offering when we're entering into this relationship. But also to have a commitment to an ongoing relationship in whatever form is possible over time. So we're still available, we're only 2 hours away. Whenever we're in the area, we'll come to visit to check. And if something comes up that enables us to continue to support Goed Verwacht in a more hands-on direct way, that we will absolutely do that. We will, you know. So that we discussed that, and we're at that point right now. So I'm going to hand over to Ian to share a bit of his reflections.
Thank you, Karen. When EMG came to Goed Verwacht with a proposal for helping us with climate change, we as the Farmers Association, we were very excited because we actually could see the change. There were some changes, not really in the climate, but in the vegetation and the water, because we had less water and we had less soil because of the takeover from projection and some other alien plants. What for me was very interesting and which made me realize how small we actually are, is that the weather data which Terran received from the weather stations surrounding Goed Verwacht wasn't really what we experienced in Goed Verwacht. We had the group which we had together was elderly and younger people, and most of the elderly people were only had primary education, and what they did very well is they got the message through. They conveyed the message in a way which everybody could understand. There was a little problem with the language barrier because the EMG people were speaking Afrikaans and we were speaking English, and we are Afrikaans-speaking community. But the way they conveyed the message and how they educated the people about climate change and what was the effect of climate change and how can we maybe adapt and reduce the effect of climate change in our town. So that they did very, very well. Then we went a little bit broader. We went away from climate change and we talked about the stuff which are really bothering us, like the alien plants in the water. So what they helped us with how they showed us how we can help ourselves. They didn't give us, I would say, they didn't give us a fish. They taught us how to catch the fish, and that we want to thank Darren for. What we're going to do in the future is, because the weather stations are giving us, and even the projections which the hydrologists and stuff gave us, doesn't really mean much to us, because from the data which Darren gave us, they said that for the next 50 years there won't be much change in the climate and stuff like that. I'm only 27 years old now, but I'm telling you that change. We are small-scale farmers. We plant vegetables. We planted green beans early September because there were a few holidays, and as soon as the holidays started, we started to plant green beans. Late in September we had frost, which we never ever had. So I'm telling you there's some change. and some of the people of Goed Verwacht are very, very independent. We don't get services from the municipality and stuff like that. Which they do now is they take away the rubbish. That's the only thing they do. We, the mission, the Moravian Church are supplying the water. Not very good water, but it's okay. And then we had some help from the Department of Agriculture implementing a main line for irrigation. And then the main problem was we actually had the help to deal with the problem of alien plants, especially projection in our rivers, because even the Department of Agriculture realized that the main line which they put in weren't enough for all the small-scale farmers, but they couldn't extract more water from the river because there wasn't enough water in the river. So with Landcare and other people, we got connected and we decided to start a project. The only problem was the funding was there. The problem was we couldn't get a letter from the church or from the council to say that we have the right to clear the alien plants, because we can't just do it because it's not our land. Since EMG have been there, we've been speaking we as a forum has been speaking to SPP, Surplus People Project, and I must say with the help of EMG, because I took facts to the council and they gave us a 9-year, 11th-month contract for our small pieces of land now. So we can move forward from there now. What EMG, Darren just gave me the good news yesterday, they will help us to have a small weather station so that we can collect our own data and make our own conclusions based on the data. So I want to say again, thank you, Darren, and I want you to ask, I know there isn't funding, but if I know about more communities which you can help in this way. If you are able, please help them as well, because it was very, very enlightening for us.